For half a century, humanity accepted a profound absurdity. To reach the vacuum of space, we built machines of breathtaking complexity, costing hundreds of millions of dollars, only to use them exactly once before letting them burn up in the atmosphere or sink to the bottom of the ocean. It was a paradigm that kept space exclusively in the hands of superpowers. But over the last decade, a single company quietly broke that paradigm forever. Understand how radically the economics of space have changed, you have to look at the baseline we were stuck with. Between the Apollo era and the early 2000s, the aerospace industry was dominated by giant legacy contractors. Innovation wasn't dead, but the economic incentives were completely misaligned. Companies were paid on a cost-plus basis, meaning the more a rocket cost to build, the more profit the contractor made. There was no financial reason to make access to space cheap. The space shuttle, a marvel of engineering, was supposed to make space access routine and affordable. But the reality was vastly different. When factoring in the total cost of the program, a single launch of the space shuttle cost roughly $1.5 billion. Even when relying on traditional expendable rockets, the numbers were staggering. If you wanted to launch a heavy payload, you called United Launch Alliance, a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Delta IV Heavy launch would set you back between $350 million to over $400 million. And every single time, that machine was thrown away. From the 1970s to the 2000s, the cost to launch a kilogram to orbit remained essentially frozen at roughly $10,000 to $18,000. The curve was flat. This was the environment SpaceX entered in 2002. Elon Musk had taken roughly $100 million from the sale of PayPal to fund a radical idea, a privately developed rocket that could dramatically cut costs. The plan was the Falcon 1, but the reality of orbital mechanics is unforgiving, and the aerospace industry is not kind to startups. Between 2006 and 2008, the Falcon 1 failed to reach orbit. 3 consecutive times. The first flight ended in a fire. The second failed to reach orbital velocity. The third suffered a stage separation collision. With each failure, the $100 million evaporated. By September 2008, the company was virtually out of money. They had just enough parts to scrape together one final rocket. Flight 4 was a do-or-die moment. If it failed, SpaceX was dead. On September 28, 2008, the fourth flight of the Falcon 1 reached orbit. It was the first privately developed, liquid-fueled rocket to ever do so. That success proved the company was viable, leading NASA to award them a $1.6 billion commercial resupply services contract just 3 months later. The company survived, but merely surviving wasn't the goal. The goal was to break the cost curve entirely. Fundamentally change the economics of space, you have to solve the expendability problem. Imagine if commercial air travel required throwing away the airplane after every flight from New York to London. A ticket would cost millions of dollars. The aerospace industry treated rockets exactly like that single-use airplane. Musk recognized that the propellant is incredibly cheap. For a Falcon 9 rocket, the fuel and liquid oxygen cost roughly $200,000. But the rocket itself, the aluminum, the engines, the avionics, costs roughly $60 million. The math is undeniable. If you don't throw away the $60 million machine, everything changes. The industry thought propulsive landing was impossible, or at best, economically unviable due to the payload penalty of carrying extra fuel. But on December 21, 2015, SpaceX landed an orbital-class booster back on Earth for the first time. In March 2017, they proved it wasn't a fluke by reflying a landed booster. Reusability went from science fiction to standard operating procedure. The economic impact was devastating to competitors. By reusing the first stage, which accounts for about 60% of the vehicle's cost, and eventually the payload fairings, SpaceX drove their launch price down to roughly $2,700 per kilogram. This represents an unprecedented discount on the price of gravity. Today, SpaceX isn't just competing in the launch market. They have effectively monopolized it. By offering the lowest prices and the highest reliability, they've forced European, Russian, and legacy American launch providers to scramble for relevance. But the true genius of their economic model lies in internal demand. In 2023, SpaceX delivered over 80% of all global mass to orbit. In 2024, they launched a staggering 130 times. The vast majority of these flights were carrying their own Starlink internet satellites. Starlink provides the massive volume required to achieve true economies of scale, justifying the high fixed costs of their factory operations. Every time a Falcon 9 launches a batch of Starlink satellites, SpaceX is essentially paying themselves the marginal cost of a launch. This vertical integration means they build the payload, they build the rocket, and they operate the network. They've created a closed-loop economic engine that no legacy contractor can match. As dominant as the Falcon 9 is, it is only partially reusable. The second stage is still thrown away on every mission. To achieve the ultimate goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species, the entire system must be rapidly and completely reusable. This is the premise of Starship. Starship is designed to be fully and rapidly reusable, capable of launching 100 tons to orbit for little more than the cost of its liquid methane fuel. If successful, it aims to drive the cost of space access down to roughly $10 to $100 per kilogram. At that price point, the economics of space flip completely. Ideas that were previously considered financially absurd, like orbital manufacturing, heavy space stations, and perhaps even asteroid mining, suddenly become viable business plans. The barrier to entry drops, and space transitions from a luxury reserved for governments into a piece of standard commercial infrastructure. If the cost to orbit drops to the price of a commercial flight, what would you build? This has been second order.